going to talk about comparing and ordering fractions, okay, and decimals. Comparing and ordering fractions and decimals. So the first thing that you have to know is LCM, okay? To compare fractions, you must have the same denominator. Okay, to compare fractions, we must have the same denominator. They will call this the LCD, least common denominator. Okay, the least common denominator is the same thing as the least common multiple. Okay, so if I'm comparing two fractions, let's say 3/4 and 5/6. If I'm comparing 3/4 and 5/6. Step one, when comparing fractions. Step one is to make two equivalent fractions with the same denominator. Okay, make two equivalent fractions with the same denominator. So, what I'm looking at is the 6 and the 4. I need to know the least common multiple of 6 and 4. In other words, if I count by 6, 12, 18, 24, and I count by 4s, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, what's the lowest number that they have in common? Celine?
2.
Okay, you weren't listening. You held your hand up and you shut your brain off. Because I just said, if we count by 4s, 4, 8, 12, 16, didn't run into a 2. If I count by 6s, 6, 12, 18, didn't run into a 2. I'm not asking for the greatest common factor. I'm asking for the least common multiple. Tristan? 12. The least common multiple between 4 and 6 is 12. So that's going to be my least common denominator. So my least common denominator of these two fractions is 12. So I'm going to create two equivalent fractions with the denominator of 12. The reason it is 12 is because the LCM of 4 and 6 is 12. Now, it will not always be 12, obviously. Okay? Now, what I ask myself is this. What did I do to 6 to make it 12? What did I multiply by? Owen? 2. So I'm going to multiply by 2, so I must do the same thing to the top. 5 times 2 is what? 10. Now, what did I do to 4 to make it 12? Multiply by what? 3. So I do the same thing to the top. That gives me 9. Okay? So now, once you have equivalent fractions, you simply compare the two numerators. Okay, so which is higher? Which is greater, 9 or 10? 10. So 10 over 12 is the greater, so I put the less than sign in the blank, because our mouth always opens to the larger number. Okay? And so that's how you would compare two fractions. All right? So let's look at two more. 2 4/9 and 2 1/2. The fact that these are mixed numbers have no bearing on how you do it. You still do it the same way. You've got to make two equivalent fractions with the same denominator. So, we need to know then for this one, what is the LCM of 9 and 2? 18. Okay? So, 18 is my common denominator. Okay, the LCM of 9 and 2 is 18. Okay, now, the 2's don't really matter in this problem because they're both the same. So we already know that we have at least a whole number of 2 on both numbers. So we can't compare that because it's a tie. Okay, so we have to move to the fraction 4/9 and 1/2. So, then what did we do to 9 to make it 18? Jesse? Multiplied by 2. So we got to do the same thing to the top, which makes it what, Jesse? 8. Now, what did I do to 2 to make it 18? Multiplied it by 9. So I do the same thing to the top, which makes 9 over 18. So the larger fraction then is a 2 1/2. Okay? Huh? What's that, Curly? Yeah, well, such is life. All right. So, now what happens if we have this? Let's say we're not comparing two fractions, but we're comparing a decimal and a fraction. Okay? So when we're comparing a decimal and a fraction, the first step becomes change the two numbers into the same type. In other words, either they both turn to decimals or they both turn to fractions. Okay? Now, if you know your numbers, then it's easier to change this to a decimal. If you know numbers. If you don't know numbers, then you may not see what 1.5 is. Okay? What is 1.5 as a decimal, Jesse? 1.5. So if we change this to a decimal, you get 1.5. Okay? We get 1.5 and we have 1.8. Okay? Well, which one is larger, 1.5 or 1.8? Noah? 1.8. So therefore, we put our greater than sign in the blank. I just knew that half is 0.5. Okay? If you don't know that, then you're probably going to have to do this. You would have to either do one of two things. You would have to take the 1.5 and change this to 10 and this to 5. So you can get it in a power of 10. Then you see that 5/10, well, 1/10 is equal to 0.1, so 5/10 has to be equal to 0.5. The other thing that you could have done is taken this and making it 1 over 1 and 8 tenths. Okay? And then you could have taken 1 over a half, get a common denominator of 10, which makes that 1 and 8 tenths, and this 1 and 5 tenths. And obviously 8 is larger than 5. That's the other way you could have done it. Okay? So depending on which way you do it, there's, obviously other steps. But the first step is to get them in the same type. Okay? Now, I want to look at ordering fractions and decimals from least to greatest. Okay, so for example, 2 over 3, 1 1/3, 0.75, and 1 1/2. I want to order those from least to greatest. Now, obviously, there's some numbers here that are larger than other numbers. Okay? Raise your hand if you know which two numbers would be the largest numbers. Jesse. 1 1/3 and 0.75. Okay? Who has another guess? Not necessarily wrong, not necessarily right. I'm just trying to see who's got guesses for me. Celine.
1 1/3 is 1 1/2.
Okay. Zach? Yeah. 1 1/2 and 1 1/3 are larger than our other two numbers. Why? Why are they larger? Jalen. Right. They have a whole number. For this, so we have 1 1/2, 1 1/3. Both of those have a whole number. Okay, they have a whole number. These two do not have a whole number. Okay? Now, so immediately I can do this. I can rearrange those numbers. Okay, and I can compare these two, and I can compare those two. Because I know these two numbers, 2/3 and 0.75, is smaller than my other two numbers. Now, what I have to look at is the 2/3 and the 0.75. Okay? 2/3, if I move 0.75 to a fraction. What is 0.75 as a fraction? Tristan. No. Xander. Right. 75 over 100. Okay. Now, 75 over 100 can reduce to 3 over 4. You reduce by 25, the top and bottom. Yeah. Now, which is larger? 2/3 or 3/4? 3/4. 3/4 is larger. So my smallest number then is what? 2/3. My next is 0.75. I got to write it with its original number. Now, that brings me to my two mixed numbers. I have 1/3 of the pizza, or I have 1/2 of the pizza. Which is larger, 1/3 of the pizza or 1/2 of the pizza? 1/2. So, 1 1/3 and 1 1/2. Those are our numbers listed in least to greatest order. Okay? Now, we didn't have to do a lot of changing decimals and fractions because it was fairly easy because of the two whole number, mixed numbers versus two regular numbers, not mixed numbers, okay? So that made it easier on us, okay? Let's look at another one. I want you to do this one on your own. Let's see here. Five over 9, 0.5, and 11 over 18. Point 5, 5/9, and 11 over 18. Do that one on your own. From least to greatest, smallest to largest. Let's look at this one. Now, here's what we have to look at. We know that 0.5 is 1/2. 1/2 is a fraction. Okay? The easiest way to do this one is change that one decimal to a fraction. Now find the common denominators. Common denominator between 9, 2, and 18 would be what? 18. So I have 18 on bottom. So that means 11. What I do to 2 to make it 18, I multiplied by 9, which makes that 9 on top. What I do to 9 to make it 18, I multiplied by 2. So I got to do the same thing at the top, which makes that 10. So that's very obvious then which one is smaller, which one is largest. And so it would go 0.5, 5 over 9, and 11 over 18. Okay? Now, listen. The other thing is this. If I look at this fraction, 5 over 9. Okay? If I look at the fraction 5 over 9, what is half of 9? What is half of 9? 4.5. Okay? So, 4.5 is half of 9. Well, is 5 more than 4.5? Then 5 over 9 has to be bigger than a half as a fraction. Okay? What is half of 18? 9. So is 11 more than 9? Okay. So both of these fractions here and here are larger than a half. Okay. So before I even came up with equivalent fractions, all that, common sense would tell us that that's bigger than a half, that's bigger than a half. So I know that 1/2 then is the smallest one. Okay. Now, 4.5, 5 is just right after 4.5, so that's pretty close to, that's right at a half. 9, 11 is 2 more than 9, so that's going to be more, that's going to be the larger one. So a lot of times you can just use common sense on these fractions, ordering them from least to greatest. Okay? But if you can't, then obviously change it to the same type. I changed it to a fraction. Okay, that's just 5 over 10. 5 over 10 is 1/2. Then we came up with our common denominator of 18. Okay? All right. Your homework. Oh, I know. Ain't it sad? 4.3. 1 through 24. 1 through 24. Okay? You still have 10 minutes left in class. I want you to start working on it without talking.